Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. Hello, and thank you for being a listener. Before we get into the episode, I wanted to let you know about a special offer being given to the new warehouse listener. That's you. Mobile Robot Guide is offering 10% off just for you when you purchase the Warehouse Solutions Buyer's Guide. Just use promo code WarehousePod10 at mobilerobotguide.com. That's WarehousePod10. This is your comprehensive guide for all things autonomous mobile robots. That's WarehousePod10. And for more info, go to thenewwarehouse.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's show, I'm going to be joined by Francois Jaffres, and he is the Director of Business Development at Noviland. And Noviland is a platform that acts as the kind of intermediary between you and manufacturers to help you procure goods that you may be interested in selling for an e-commerce platform or for your company, for a whole different range of things. So Francois is going to tell us a little bit about the platform, how it kind of developed, and how it's helping people to connect with manufacturers to source certain items that they are looking to source from their wide manufacturing network. So Francois, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm good. Happy to connect with you and kind of learn about this platform that you guys have. So I'm curious, tell us a little bit about Noviland, but I'm also curious where the name came from too.
So I guess to start out, we actually started as Eurekian. Okay. And in the phone calls, people actually thought that we were a vacuum company. The Eureka brand vacuum company. And so we had to make a quick change from that. And I think the name was just one of those things where it was an open domain, and Chuan, our founder, just sort of stumbled upon it. And so that's where the name came about. It doesn't have, a fancy story behind it. Okay. Unfortunately, it's not a really cool story. But it's just like with every startup, it took that little bit of luck just to stumble upon it. Yeah. And it really started as a need for finding manufacturers in a more reliable way, in a more streamlined way than how it's traditionally done. So where you hit the nail on the head, where we do work with a wide variety of different companies, whether it's for e-commerce, whether it's for construction, whether it's wholesalers that are looking for whatever the product may be. Could be office chairs that they wholesale to local businesses. Could be, PPE that they're looking to wholesale and sell off to smaller mom and pop shops. Everyone has a need for sourcing these products, and it could be, they're buying it from their competitors, which is true a lot of times, specifically for wholesalers. Direct competitors, indirect competitors, they might be sourcing through a sourcing agent or a trade agent, or they might be doing something like, going on an open marketplace like Alibaba. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with using a marketplace like Alibaba. But there are the risks that you run, right? You have no idea who's on the other side of the screen. Right. It's an open marketplace, and it's very pay to play. So anyone that is a verified gold supplier on there paid a few $1,000s. Now they have a check mark. Right. It's a verification process that usually uses more of a local labor force and who knows what actually happens. They don't go into grave detail.
Yeah.
But from what a lot of my team have told me, it's really just they find whoever the owner of that business is, and they just have a quick conversation with them. Sometimes, palms are greased. Sometimes it's completely valid, and sometimes it's a trade company that rented out a manufacturer for a day and is posing as a manufacturer. That's the unfortunate side of it. Outside of trusting your money, just on the other side of the world, that's another key difference. And so we saw all these different needs that these different types of businesses had, and we found a solution to it. And that solution is really to have a centralized platform for a U.S.-based company and be able to do all of the actions that are typically taken within sourcing and logistics and purchasing, and making that more accessible to every size business, not just the Fortune 500s, not just the 50 mil plus businesses or any enterprise companies, but the smaller e-commerce sellers too. The Amazon sellers that are, they might just start out as a side hustle, but really want to grow financial independence. And the way to do that is really to just provide a secondary level of service between you and those people overseas, and those people being the factories and the factory owners. Where very traditionally a factory owner maybe in their upper 50s or 60s, and traditional factory owners, they might not speak English, but they might work with a trade agent that represents them and is sort of that marketing and sales arm for them. So we developed this network of factories consisting of over 4,000 factories now across just about all product categories. And we work with all of our users very one-on-one. It's a very white glove service. We kind of try to teach them the ropes by providing them an RFQ guideline. But from there, they're always working with the Noviland employee. So whether it's a product specialist or an order manager that oversees logistics, or a quality control inspector that provides them with the reports and may have to answer some questions about how it was done. We have an entire team that's working with this business. And like I said, it could be a brand new startup Amazon seller, or it could be an established enterprise. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Very in depth. So I mean, I got a little demo before we started talking here. And I would say the platform it's super simple to navigate through, and it looks really easy to go through the process. So I guess kind of touching on, as I see it and as we're talking about it, it seems like it's really a great tool for like the smaller business, as you mentioned, like the mom and pop, to have, because you have these smaller companies and these people that are getting into e-commerce, like you mentioned, and they don't necessarily have the bandwidth or maybe the background or experience to be able to handle kind of this procurement and then the logistics and then tracking and connecting with manufacturers. It can be a lot. And you guys seem to be kind of that middleman or middle person almost, right? In a very simple way where, you don't really necessarily have to worry about traveling overseas to find a manufacturer or source these products that you're looking for. You can kind of just submit what you're looking for, and then you guys kind of take it from there. So why don't you talk us just, I guess, briefly through the process of like, okay, I'm a mom and pop store. I have an idea for a product that I want to carry. I come to Noviland. Then what happens?
So even just taking one step back, it's really developing that product, right? You can't just tell someone that you want a water bottle. You have to tell them, hey, I want a plastic water bottle that's BPA free, and it has a label on it, and it has a certain type of nozzle on the top of it. It has to go into detail, as much detail as possible. And that requires also thinking about packaging. Hey, do I need this to be a CPG, or can it be a plain box packaging because it's going into Amazon? Do I need a card insert? Do I need it to be covered in a heat shrink wrap. There's all these different pieces to it that have to be thought about early on. Otherwise, you're coming, to be frank, with a half-assed idea. And no factory really wants to work with that. And so it's developing that product, and then it is going onto the platform and submitting that RFQ. And so listing out all of those details, you can submit a video about explaining about what your product is or what your project is, letting us know your budget, your target purchase price, and that could be a range, of course. Any key quality indicators. So, some people might be okay with buying T-shirts that have some loose string on them because they're cheap. It's just a cheap product.
Right.
Others might not be able to accept that. They need a higher quality product overall. So they're willing to pay that little bit of extra. And it's really going on there, submitting an RFQ. We either have a factory for you or we don't. Quotes are absolutely free. So we'll let you know pretty quickly if we don't. It's just the reality of it. Yeah. And but of course, when we look at the factories to begin with, we do look at, have they made a similar product in the past? Is this their specialty? Do they have the right machinery for it? Do they have the right labor force? How long is their production lead time? There's all these different variables that you really have to look at. And it's not getting the BS answers from, a trade agent where they're just going to try to rake in your order and deal with the repercussions later. It's really getting all this information up front. We do that by working with only factory management. So it makes it a lot easier, a lot safer for us. And after, you get quotes, you can order samples. We coordinate sample consolidation and shipping, and you can place orders. Your money never leaves the U.S. or, if you're in Australia or UK or France or Canada, all these different countries that we have users in, you're still sending it to a U.S.-based company, and we distribute that money out to the factories, almost like an escrow.
Gotcha.
Of course, we are your supplier, so it's a lot more protected too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, I guess, on that topic of the protection. So the money, I guess, when you place an order, it goes through you guys, and what happens if something does fall through? What type of protections are in place that maybe, like we were talking about, Alibaba is a little risky at times. What type of protections do you guys provide versus some of the other options?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, so we essentially provide a guarantee that the money is always going to be safe, particularly being a U.S.-based company. The rules and regulations with money here are just no joke, needless to say. And we're signing localized contracts, right? So we have one contract with our buyer, wherever they may be, and that's done in English, and it's enforceable by U.S. law. But then we also have a localized contract in China with the factory.
Okay.
That lays out all the detailed specifications, and fully written in Chinese, inspected by Chinese lawyers, of course. And that's enforceable also in China, whereas an international contract is very hard to enforce.
Right.
It's, if you're not spending at least $75,000, there's no point in even trying to litigate if anything goes wrong. And that's where a lot of times, a newer company or even an established company, I've seen a lot of established companies go through this. They just get a poor product, or they might get ripped off, and there's nothing they can do about it. Because it's just not worth more than that order value was. So we have all these protections in place in order to be able to mitigate them to begin with, but also enforce them if need be.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing too. Like, we're talking about the example of the like small mom and pop or somebody just starting out. That's, one of the things too is like, okay, I'm gonna, deal with somebody that's thousands of miles away, and what if something happens? What do I do? Right? Am I just like out all my money or something? So it's good to know that you guys have things in place to help protect the buyer. So we kind of learned a little bit about what Noviland is and the process of using the platform. So I'm curious, in discussing the market a little bit. So obviously, pandemic, COVID, that's the hot topic, right? I mean, it's still ongoing. Still seeing issues from it, and it's kind of changed the landscape of everything almost. So I'm curious, on the Noviland side. So one thing, obviously, there was a high demand for PPE, something in America, right? We never really had a huge demand as a regular consumer. But, I'm curious, what did Noviland see throughout the pandemic? Has there been like an uptick in not only certain products, but also demand from new users? Has there been more new users as well?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought that up because it actually just made me think about a secondary type of product that or category that started to rise, and that was really what we're seeing now: home offices, home furniture, home decor. A lot of people trying to source a lot more of it.
Yeah,
it was interesting to see that puzzles, different types of puzzles, were actually one of the hottest commodities that we saw come through all the time. And of course, you see that on Instagram, TikTok, wherever you're getting your social media, you started seeing a lot more people with puzzles and a lot more people renovating their homes. And so it made sense. Of course, we saw all the PPE. We saw masks, nitrile gloves, hand sanitizer, digital thermometers, you name it, we saw it from both the public and the private sectors. So it was that was the biggest demand, and there were a lot of challenges that came with that. Not necessarily on the request side, but the overall supply chain. And I think this is really where we were able to provide a lot of value, because with the rise of PPE really came the rise of pop-up factories. And with those pop-up factories came the rise of poor quality products. And it's a fairly large misconception that a lot of people have, where it's China equals cheap products.
Right.
That's not necessarily true. You can get some of the highest quality products from China. It's just depending on what you want to spend. So if you're buying cheap products, you're buying cheap products from a cheap company.
Right.
That's just sort of how it works. And so a lot of pop-up factories started, coming up, and on top of that, the exporting of these poor quality products started to be visualized more by the Chinese government. And this is where they had the Customs Announcement 53, I think it was. And they said, look, we're going to start buckling down on this. We're going to make sure that we inspect every single piece of PPE that's leaving China, because EU had a huge issue with it. And so now you have to figure, okay, we have to find a factory that is on this new custom list that China is regulating. You have to make sure that they meet certain qualities. You have to make sure that they have either FDA or CE certifications, that they're listed properly. Is something else that a lot of companies just were not in tune with. Hey, how am I actually listing this on the FDA site as a medical device? Make sure that it would be able to be imported properly. Make sure that if it's a general disposable face mask, not necessarily a, what do they call it? Not a ventilator, but the more upgraded types of masks.
The KN95 one you're talking about?
Yeah, like the N95s.
Yeah.
That the packaging also didn't have those types of marks, or that they wouldn't reference, curing viruses or curing COVID by any means. These are all small parts that if even one of them go wrong, that company's SOL.
Yeah.
You're receiving products, you're going to try to resell them. It's going to be impossible. You're going to get cracked down by the FDA.
Yeah.
And so we were able to step in and sort of work with a lot of different hospitals and companies and, like I said, the public sector also, and telling them all of these sort of issues that were rising. And when we were vetting factories, I think we weeded out over 90%, maybe even over 95% of all of them, because they weren't producing the right quality. It wasn't a consistent product, and we weren't sure about the effectiveness of theirs because they weren't getting the proper tests done. And so, of course, that left with a small handful of factories, and we were doing this for months. This wasn't just, a one and done 2-week thing. It was done over the series of probably 2 or 3 months, speaking to hundreds of different factories and getting quotes and getting samples and, requiring certifications and making sure that the certifications weren't just a shared one, that they were, photoshopping different numbers on. It's a long process. So I know you mentioned that, we're great for the smaller mom and pops, which we absolutely are. But that's a tedious process even for established businesses, for enterprise level companies. And that's where we really are able to provide that value as well.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting to see how, I guess, quickly the supply chain tried to react to this new surging demand for PPE, and it's really interesting to hear what you guys went through on your side and dealing with these manufacturers and trying to get them to the right standards and everything, especially, as you're dealing, I guess you have customers on both ends almost. You have the manufacturer and then you have the purchaser too. So you're trying to kind of get that synergy. So it's really interesting to hear how you guys went about that and how you vetted everything and made sure that it was meeting regulations, which especially with the PPE, as we know, is incredibly important because we're dealing with people's health, right? So I'm curious as well, so that's kind of on the product side. What about on the user side? So did you see more increased demand, people coming from you trying to source these types of things than you would typically see?
Interestingly, yes. We thought that we were actually going to see a huge dip in demand, but it kind of opened a lot of companies' eyes as to diversification. And I think that's an important conversation for every company to have, not just the enterprise level, but also those that are just starting out. And diversification is something that takes a long time to actually establish. Developing relationships with different types of factories, vetting them, getting samples, getting quotes, and then maintaining those relationships are also important. And so that's something that we can provide companies. And so we saw a huge uptick actually in a lot of new users, a lot of new companies that are just exploring. They're just, hey, my factory's been closed down for the past 2 months, or they're not responding, or their production queue is just way too long. I need to find an alternative. And we're able to help them do that at scale. So, where they might be looking for one product because you're a startup, and enterprise might be looking for 50 to replace 50 of their suppliers because they just can't produce their products, and there's a high demand in the market right now, particularly right after the stimulus checks. And so we can help them do that efficiently, very simply, just all done right in the platform, the Noviland platform, and effectively. So, finding the right factories for their products, not just a factory that can make the products.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I think that one thing I wanted to ask actually, because we just had a recent episode that released, and we were talking about the concept of, I guess, reshoring manufacturers, as that's kind of come out of the pandemic, where people, obviously had an issue with the shutdowns and everything, trying to source materials from China or other countries. So how is Noviland, the manufacturers that you work with, are they all just China-based, or do you guys have a larger footprint? And are you doing anything in that sense to kind of pivot to help those companies that want to reshore a little bit and localize manufacturing a little more?
Great questions. So to answer your first question, yes, all of our factory network currently is in China.
Okay.
We do have another network that we're establishing in Vietnam as well, and Vietnam actually just got a huge investment. I think it was over $1 billion. I want to say, don't quote me exactly on that, but to invest into their infrastructure from another Chinese company. It's something that they desperately need. They are definitely one of the contenders for China Plus One. But in regards to nearshoring, it's not something that is top of mind because I don't think that it's something that can realistically be done quickly.
Right.
Now, that's a phenomenal long-term solution. And I am all for manufacturing in the U.S.
Yeah.
But also what I think a conversation a lot of people don't have is what incentives do companies really have for nearshoring other than being able to have their products? Now, enterprise level companies, they have to keep their stakeholders in mind, right? And all their key stakeholders are always going to be looking at the bottom line. And the bottom line is always going to be, hey, we want to increase our margins every single year, year over year. You can't go from China or from Vietnam or from Malaysia and start nearshoring and keep those same stakeholders or shareholders happy. It's just something that is fairly unrealistic. And that's a conversation that not too people have or may even want to have. So these companies do have incentives for staying outside of the U.S. You typically have a cheaper labor force or more developed manufacturing infrastructure. They might have greater access to certain raw materials, whatever the case may be. And so when it comes to nearshoring, I think there are going to be some businesses that can find a benefit, particularly for wooden products or something that can use more of an automated CNC milling machines. But you're just not going to see the same margins, I don't think. I still think a lot of parts and pieces are going to be coming from foreign countries. I think you can start developing maybe the main component of a product in the U.S. or in Mexico, and that can help things. But it's certainly a long-term solution. It's not something that's going to happen next year or in the next 5 years, even maybe in the next decade. I think that could be a potential outlook for the next decade, but I just realistically don't see that happening in the U.S. Going outside of China or having China Plus One, definitely. I completely see that happening in the next 5 years. Could be China Plus India, China Plus Vietnam, China Plus Mexico. There's so many different countries that can actually manufacture. But when it comes to nearshoring, I just don't. I don't see it.
Interesting. Yeah. I was curious. Like I said, I just had a discussion with somebody else about that and the concept of it, and I guess not just reshoring manufacturing, but also like different aspects of the supply chain too. So I was curious if you're seeing any of that from your customers. So it's really, and I agree with you. I think it's a long process. It's not like overnight snap your finger kind of thing and boom, I'm manufacturing, a couple miles away or something. So yeah, it's really interesting. So I'm curious on that thought. What's the future for Noviland look like?
Yeah, hopefully being a lot more than just China. We definitely have our eyes set on a few other countries that are very particular to certain categories. I don't want to give too much away right now, but definitely looking into quick expansion. Definitely growing our team out. I mean, we're continuously growing our team out in China and in the U.S. And Vietnam even. And so it's just getting into different countries, learning their supply chains, because every supply chain is going to be different. Every country has a different infrastructure, different way of doing business. Setting up shop and just rather than just making on a China scale, making on a global scale. I think that's just as important, and not just focusing on the U.S., but also, looking into countries that really need it more. Maybe even Africa, maybe Europe, and giving those businesses more access to manufacturing globally. I think that is really one of our visions and goals.
That would be great.
And it's just a matter of time before we get there.
Yeah, that's really I like that you guys want to do that. That's I think that would be really great if there was somebody that could bring, to a country or something that really needs some kind of economic development to be able to kind of provide that vehicle a little bit and connect them maybe with more globally in a sense. So that'd be really cool if you guys could do that. And I wish you luck on that. I will hope that you guys can do that, and we can talk about that in the future as well. So Francois, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking to us about Noviland. How can people find out more information about Noviland?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. To find more information about Noviland, I would just suggest Googling us, and you can find our Facebook there. Definitely, if you like and follow our page on Facebook, we'll be releasing a lot of information on supply chain, a lot of education. Same thing on LinkedIn. If LinkedIn is your preferred social media, we'll release a lot of the same content in a different context on there. And you can, obviously connect with me on LinkedIn. I love answering questions. Sometimes I get into these, deep things or deep conversations with different business professionals about their business and just exploring how they can sort of improve their supply chain. I love those types of conversations. So definitely feel free to connect, whether it's on Facebook with the Noviland Inc. Page, whether it's on LinkedIn on the Noviland Inc. page, or directly with me, Francois, on LinkedIn also. And just feel free to shoot me a message.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll put all that information on the newwarehouse.com as well. So Francois, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kevin.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.